If it's Friday, the president bids farewell to Elon Musk as the two men take questions in the Oval Office, defending DOGE's efforts to cut government spending while slamming judges who rule against the administration. Plus, President Trump lashes out at China, accusing Beijing of violating an economic agreement with the U.S. as trade negotiations appear to hit an impasse and the global economy braces for more tariff turmoil ahead. And the Supreme Court hands the Trump administration a major legal win for now, allowing the White House to strip more than 500,000 migrants of their temporary legal status as President Trump looks to ratchet up mass deportations and arrests. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where Elon Musk this afternoon received an Oval Office farewell as the world's richest man departs his position as a special government employee after becoming the face of the administration's efforts to cut spending and slash the deficit. Mr. Musk came into the role wielding a literal chainsaw, vowing to make government more efficient, promising to slash trillions in spending and save the nation from deficit bankruptcy. But he leaves falling well short of his own lofty goals. And while butting heads with the White House over the president's massive spending bill, which nonpartisan scorekeepers say would add trillions to the deficit. At the White House today, President Trump papered over some of those recent disputes, gifting Musk a symbolic key to the White House, while also signaling he will maintain some kind of advisory role.
Today, it's about a man named Elon, and he's one of the greatest business leaders and innovators the world has ever produced. He stepped forward to put his very great talents into the service of our nation, and we appreciate it. And I just want to say that Elon has worked tirelessly helping lead the most sweeping and consequential government reform program in generations. Elon's really not leaving. He's going to be back and forth, I think. I have a feeling. It's his baby, and I think he's going to be doing a lot of things.
Now, Musk echoed that sentiment, adding that DOGE's work will continue even without Musk at the helm.
The DOGE team is doing an incredible job. They're going to continue doing an incredible job, and I'll continue to be visiting here and be a friend and advisor to the president, and I look forward to times being back in this amazing room. Well, I expect to continue to provide advice whenever the president would like advice.
I hope so.
I mean, I expect to remain a friend and an advisor, and certainly if there's anything the president wants me to do, I'm at the president's service.
Now, Musk's tenure was marred by chaos and questions about just how much DOGE was actually able to accomplish. DOGE's self-reported savings, much of which has been disputed or lacks verification, is roughly $175 billion. The actual savings are believed to be far less than that. And even if that $175 billion number was accurate, it represents less than 3% of annual government spending and far less than DOGE's initial $2 trillion goal. Meanwhile, many of DOGE's efforts to restructure the government and terminate thousands of government employees remains tied up in the courts. As we noted in recent days, Musk has been critical of the president's mega bill currently making its way through Congress. But in an interview with CBS, Musk says he has a difference of opinion on some things happening inside the Trump administration.
It's not like I agree with everything the administration does. So it's like I agree with much of what the administration does, but we have differences of opinion.
Joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, NPR technology correspondent Bobby Allen, and NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. Garrett, let me start with you at the White House. What were your key takeaways from that really remarkable Oval Office appearance with Elon Musk and the president?
Yeah, Kristen, look, both of these men have had famous blow-ups with other powerful men with whom they have shared power or the spotlight over the years. And this felt to me like an effort to make sure the end of the Elon Musk era here at the White House doesn't include one of those blow-ups. That both sides wanted to go out looking like everything is absolutely fine. They're still a team. They still have shared goals and a shared mission, and to try to make sure this is a smooth transition for the world's most wealthy man and the world's most powerful man to be going their separate ways. You saw the president, who I think has come to realize he could command quite the spotlight with these midday press availabilities that aren't proper press conferences, pushing a number of false claims, including the degree to which DOGE cuts have worked, the price of gas, which he artificially lowered in this hearing, or in this availability. And he's able to do it without a lot of pushback, given the structure of these things, which are pool-only events, when the White House now controls the composition of the pool. So you saw pretty, I think, tepid pushback on a number of these points, letting Musk and Trump set the narrative as Musk returns to his business empire, at least as his full-time gig.
Well, and Garrett, it's a great point, because one of the threads that was looming over this availability was this report from the New York Times saying that Elon Musk was using drugs like ketamine and ecstasy while on the campaign trail. NBC News has not confirmed that reporting. But what is the White House saying? Was Elon Musk pressed about this at all today?
Pressed is not the verb I would use, Kristen. There was one kind of tepid effort to ask about this. When Musk heard New York Times, he took the very Trumpian tactic of cutting off the question and focusing on the Times and his complaints about their reporting on issues related to Donald Trump, and essentially stifled the question before the word drugs could even be asked. As for the White House, they've responded to questions about the drug use or the alleged drug use by defending Elon Musk in more general terms, talking about his stellar business career and the sacrifices he's made. I think the closest you're going to get to any acknowledgement of this is the way in which both Musk and the president in the Oval Office today talked about how he was the target of slings and arrows and of tough reporting and attacks along the way. But nobody has dealt with the substance of this report yet from either the White House or Musk himself.
Interesting. So, Garrett, what happens next to DOGE? You heard Elon Musk there say that his team at DOGE will stay in place. You heard President Trump say that Elon Musk may be leaving, but he's not going far. What does all of this add up to without Elon Musk physically at the White House?
Yeah, look, I think Elon Musk and the White House have both learned that cutting this kind of spending that they've talked about is really hard. There's a reason it hasn't been done in generations. And they were at loggerheads, be it, between Musk wanting to make more significant changes at Social Security and the president wanting him to keep his hands off, to various cabinet agencies ultimately pushing back against Musk's efforts to gut their staff, to Congress not yet fully grappling with the kinds of reforms and changes that would be really necessary to change the trajectory of government spending. That'll be the next big fight, if it's a big fight, with the rescissions package. That's essentially a bill to undo previous government-approved or congressional-approved spending, going to the Hill in short order. The budget director was talking about that today. If Congress is really willing to walk back money that Congress has already approved to be spent, that's the kind of structural change that would ultimately be necessary to make the kind of long-term cuts Elon Musk wants. I, as a former congressional reporter, am skeptical that they will be able to do that. But that's what this will look like. So the DOGE, ethos continues, but the low-hanging fruit are gone, and the difficult structural changes still have to be dealt with if they're going to be.
All right, Garrett Haake, thank you so much for your great reporting from the White House. Bobby, let me turn to you. Let's talk about how Elon Musk views his time at the White House. He set out and said he was going to cut $1 trillion. Then it became $1 trillion. Now he's saying he found about $100 billion in savings. Does he believe his time at the White House was a success?
Well, I think, as Garrett just said, Musk became increasingly disenchanted over just how difficult it is to cut costs within the federal government. Musk is used to coming into, say, a company like Twitter, X, right, and saying, I'm going to cut 80% of the staff. I'm going to cut contracts. I'm going to end real estate relationships and just do it in one fell swoop. But in the federal government, it's a very different situation. And he came in to try to launch a war against the bureaucracy. And some might say he was ultimately defeated by the bureaucracy. And, really for his companies, it's been really, really tough. I think one of the big surprises for Musk was just how much of a brand liability being in the White House would be, especially for Tesla. I don't think he fully appreciated just how much of a backlash there would be among owners of Tesla cars, among investors, among others in the business community. He feels really ostracized right now, and he thinks, you know what? I tried my best in the White House. I really want to come in and fight waste, fraud, and abuse, and I'm leaving feeling a little disenchanted, a little frustrated, but he knows he has to get back to Tesla he has to get back to SpaceX because at the end of the day, those are his full-time jobs.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of scrutiny about his return to those companies. There's been also a lot of scrutiny about his relationship with President Trump. How do you assess his relationship as he's set to walk out the door? I can't remember the last time I saw a departure like this one where President Trump is praising the work that someone did in the Oval Office.
Yeah, it's really kind of a soft exit, isn't it? So he's no longer going to be at the helm of DOGE, but he's still going to be an advisor in some capacity. And I think Elon thinks having an inroad into the White House can really help him from a regulatory perspective. Let's not forget, there are dozens of investigations, government investigations into Elon Musk's business empire. He has billions of dollars in federal government subsidies that are propping up some of his companies like SpaceX. So having a direct line into President Trump, he knows can help lift the bottom line of his companies at a time when they are feeling besieged, at a time when Tesla reported that its profits in the first quarter of the year are down 71%. So Elon Musk knows having an ally in the White House is only going to really help his future and the preservation of his business interests. But within the White House, it's become very clear that dealing with Elon is kind of a pain. And I think many there are very relieved to have him out of the White House.
Yeah, part of the story there, his clashes with various cabinet officials. Bobby Allen, thank you so much. We really appreciate your perspective. Let's turn to Sahil Kapoor. Sahil, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Well, we know that just this week, Elon Musk was quite critical of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. He said it could potentially undermine the work of DOGE and that there just aren't enough cuts in it. How might that impact the debate on Capitol Hill, this Big Beautiful Bill now moving to the Senate?
I don't think it'll have much of an impact, Kristen. I think Republican lawmakers are going to decide what's in or out of that bill on their own basis. I do think the DOGE project has been objectively a failure by Elon Musk's own standards. He came in with a lot of bravado, brandishing that chainsaw, talking about how he's going to cut trillions of dollars from the budget and balance the budget. They're doing the opposite. That $2 trillion that he was talking about cutting, the Big Beautiful Bill would increase the deficit on net by more than $2 trillion. So one could argue that the White House was never really serious about this goal in the beginning, and that there was some PR benefit to talking about the DOGE goal, the government efficiency. Elon Musk ultimately treated this idea of government efficiency as something nobody had really thought about until he came along, as opposed to something people had tried to do but repeatedly failed to do because it's extremely difficult. He went after pieces of the budget that are popular to cut, like foreign aid. Firing a bunch of civil servants has a lot of support among conservative voters, but those are small slices of the budget. He clearly did not come in with a plan to build the coalition needed to make the kind of cuts that he was talking about.
Well, what's interesting, Sahil, is that what we're hearing from Elon Musk is not altogether different than what we're hearing from some Republicans in the Senate who oppose this bill right now, Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Rand Paul, who say this just adds too much to the deficit, that they're not going to be able to get behind it. You've been covering Capitol Hill for a long time. Talk a little bit about these dynamics. We know that House Speaker Mike Johnson, who I'll be speaking with exclusively this Sunday on Meet the Press, has said to his colleagues in the Senate, please don't make too many trims because we need to be able to pass it through the House one more time before it gets to the president's desk.
Absolutely. So Republican leaders in the House and the Senate are facing a squeeze on two ends. John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, is dealing with a group of fiscal hawks, including Senator Ron Johnson, including Senator Rand Paul, who want the cuts to be a lot steeper in order to vote for it. Then on the other hand, he's dealing with senators who are already queasy with the level of Medicaid spending cuts in there, already queasy with the clean energy funding cuts in there, and are questioning some of the existing cuts. Again, as Garrett was talking about, it's a lot easier to talk in the abstract about spending cuts. It's much harder when you get down to the ground level because, frankly, many voters are not well informed about what the government spends money on. And the fact that most of government spending is actually either very popular or has a lot of political support. One little note on Elon Musk, he came in talking about how he's going to reduce military spending, that there was a lot of fat and bloat in the Pentagon, which many people would argue there is. Yeah. It turns out this Big Beautiful Bill increases military spending by $150 billion. That is quite a metaphor.
Yeah, a lot of Republicans saying you have to deal with the bloat there, which is, of course, one of the most challenging places. Sahil Kapoor, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Coming up, another day of trade war whiplash as President Trump accuses China of violating an economic agreement with the U.S. We have the very latest developments and the response from Wall Street, plus new details on ICE's plan to ramp up migrant arrests as the Supreme Court allows the Trump administration to strip more than 500,000 migrants of their legal status. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning to the latest in President Trump's tariff roller coaster. In a Truth Social post this morning, President Trump accused China of violating an agreement they made with the U.S. That post came after Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said negotiations with China were, quote, a bit stalled. President Trump reiterated his claim in the Oval Office, but did not identify how exactly China broke its word.
They violated a big part of the agreement we made. You know, if you read that whole statement, I was very nice to them. I helped them because they were in trouble with the stoppage of a massive amount of business. But I'm sure that I'll speak to President Xi and hopefully we'll work that out. But yeah, there's a violation of the agreement.
China, meanwhile, is accusing the U.S. of violating the consensus they reached at those talks in Geneva earlier this month, which led both nations to roll back their tariffs. Markets didn't move much today on the president's news, ending the day pretty much where it began. Joining me now is NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. Brian, thanks so much for being here on this Friday. So what do we know about President Trump's accusations that China violated a deal with the U.S.? Are there any specifics here?
Yeah, well, Kristen, kind of as you just outlined, we don't really have the specifics beyond the president alleging that they violated some part of the agreement, which again refers to the post-Geneva meeting between U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer as well as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent with their counterparts in China. Again, that meeting a few weeks ago that concluded in the reduction of the U.S. tariffs on China from 145% to 30%. I want to point out that that wasn't necessarily an agreement that lowered the temperature to zero because, again, 30% was still substantially higher than the tariffs that were in effect prior to the administration coming into office on January 20th. But again, basically the phrasing of the remarks from the Oval Office as well as from the Truth Social post that preceded it earlier this morning just suggested there was some part of the agreement that was violated. But again, a bit thin on details in terms of what aspect specifically of that agreement that was violated, Kristen.
All right. Well, we know that the White House did lash out at the International Court of Trade before the pause in its ruling yesterday. What did we hear from the president today, Brian?
Yeah, well, the president did opine on that from the Oval Office today, again, after what was a whipsawed 24 hours where yesterday in the morning we had thought that this International Trade Court had struck down the tariffs. But then an appeals court said, hey, while we take a look at the merits of this case, we're going to allow the administration to continue to impose these 10% baseline tariffs on essentially every country around the world, as well as the so-called fentanyl tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China. Take a listen to what the president said with regards to the appeals court decision to reinstate those tariffs.
I mean, I was so honored that we got that ridiculous stay lifted because that would have taken away presidential power. It would have taken away everything that was granted by the founders. It would have been a terrible thing. And it would have, most importantly, would have left us vulnerable. Hopefully now we'll go to court and just win that battle. Because if we don't have the power to do what they're doing to us, we are going to be a great nation no longer.
So you can hear the president clearly thrilled with the prospect that at least these tariffs can remain in effect. But again, I want to point out the appeals court isn't necessarily reversing the prior court's ruling. They're just saying while they review it and they hear from both the plaintiffs and the defendants, again, they'll allow the tariffs to remain in effect. So this fight is still far from over, at least legally, Kristen.
Yeah, we know you'll continue to watch it. Brian Chung, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Joining me now is one of the president's top economic advisors, the director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Well, let me ask you about this social media post by the president this morning. Mr. Trump saying that China violated a deal with the U.S. He repeated that claim you just heard there in the Oval Office. What is the violation? And is the president, in fact, planning to put tariffs back on as a result?
Well, the bottom line is that there's an ongoing negotiation that the U.S. Trade Representative, Jameson Greer, is in contact, as is the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, with their Chinese counterparts. And I think that there is some frustration with the pace of the sort of China moving forward with the things that they've agreed to. And I think that it's appropriate at a time like that to talk about your frustrations, because that's how things get communicated and how things change. And so we're very hopeful that this will be worked out soon. But yes, I think that there's a lot of frustration with the pace of what China's been doing.
Director Hassett, just to be very clear, given that frustration, could President Trump reimpose tariffs at a higher rate on China?
President Trump and everybody on President Trump's team are hoping that this deal that was negotiated in Geneva, that the things that were put in place are accomplished and accomplished quickly. And that's what everybody's focused on right now.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the talks with China are stalled right now. Is that an accurate assessment?
I think that he put a few words around the word stalled, because stalled would mean that they're stopped. But I think we're absolutely frustrated that they're moving slower than we would like. And I'm sure that that's what he was meaning to characterize.
He said they're a bit stalled.
A bit stalled, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
to be
a
accurate.
bit stalled.
So
yeah, so it's
that?
Not exactly
okay.
stalled. It's just moving slower than we would like.
Okay, let's talk about the International Court of Trade ruling. I talked to Stephen Moore yesterday, who you're familiar with. Of course, he was an economic advisor to President Trump during the 2016 campaign. He told me he's not confident the Trump administration would prevail if this goes to the Supreme Court, because the Constitution says that tax bills must start in the House. Does he have a point?
No, Steve's completely wrong on this. And the bottom line is that Jameson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, is the smartest trade lawyer person in America on earth. He knows this stuff cold. We have a million options for how we could do the tariffs that President Trump wants in order to start opening up markets around the world and to get reciprocal trade policy to be enacted. We have a million options, and we chose this option because it's the one that's the fastest and the most legally sound. And so we're very confident that that we're going to prevail in court eventually, and we're very disappointed when it had a hiccup for a day. And I actually was sort of surprised when the reversal happened yesterday. I was surprised it even took them that long, because it was so obvious that we're on really solid ground legally.
You know, it was interesting, Director Hassett, you said at the White House yesterday you weren't worried about economic uncertainty. I do want to put up what we heard from the Fed at minutes released from their May meeting. I'll read this. It says participants agreed that uncertainty about the economic outlook had increased further, making it appropriate to take a cautious approach until the net economic effects of the array of changes to government policies become clearer. That's pretty clear there, that there is some uncertainty, is it not?
Well, obviously, the bill has to pass in the Senate, and then it has to become law. So the big, beautiful bill, there's perhaps uncertainty for some about that, but we're highly, highly confident that that's going to happen and that it's going to provide a massive boost to the U.S. economy. I think that President Trump's trade policy is very, very clear. That we've started to have deals that give people an idea of what it's going to look like in the future. And so I think that people know what to expect. And that's why consumer sentiment just jumped by about the most it ever has, why we got a report today that showed that incomes are soaring, and why the jobs numbers have been so good while inflation's going down. And so I think that we're highly, highly confident that we've got a plan that's going to create a golden age for the economy. And you're starting to see it in the hard numbers as well.
You're touting a lot of different data points in the economy. Is this now the Trump economy, Director Hassett?
There's always a question of, so there are policies that are in place that President Biden put in. And so the question is, why is the economy right now starting to boom? And the reason is that people are confident that President Trump has changed the trajectory and is bringing us to a place where, for example, in the first quarter, we had 20% equipment investment, 10% capital spending, because everybody's building factories in the U.S. again. All of that is happening because of President Trump. But of course, there are things that are going on in the economy that aren't just because of President Trump.
Now, what do you say to people who say you can't have it both ways, Director Hassett?
What do you mean?
That you can't just pick the pieces of the economy that you like and say that President Trump owns that, but not the pieces that we don't like.
Well, the thing is that what you have to do is you have to have a reason for the things that you're analyzing. And so, for example, in the State of the Union address or the joint session, President Trump said that we're going to pass the big, beautiful bill and we're going to have expensing of capital investment, and it's going to be retroactive to the 20th of January. And then all of a sudden we get a 20% boom in capital spending. And so when you see that there's a reason for something that happens, and then you see that the thing happens, as you have an ex ante theory and an ex post realization of the data, then you've got a good story. But if you don't have a good story, then you shouldn't say it.
Let me ask you about President Trump's meeting with Fed Chair Jerome Powell at the White House yesterday. I want to put up the Fed's readout. Chair Powell said that he and his colleagues will set monetary policy as required by law to support maximum employment and stable prices, and will make those decisions based solely on careful, objective, and non-political analysis. You were in the Oval Office, sir. Did President Trump push him to lower interest rates?
You know, President Trump and Chairman Powell had a very collegial and friendly discussion. And President Trump's views about interest rates are obviously quite visible in his previous posts on Truth Social. I'm not going to talk about what we talked about in the Oval, but I 100% agree with Chairman Powell's statement.
Very quickly, just on the big, beautiful bill, Elon Musk, of course, his final day at the White House today, even though the president says he'll still be close. He has expressed real criticism of the big, beautiful bill, noting that it will add to the deficits. He says can't be big and beautiful at the same time. And quite frankly, he's echoing what we're hearing from a number of Republican senators on Capitol Hill, from Senator Ron Johnson to Senator Rand Paul. What is your response to your Republican critics, and how do you get it over the finish line?
Look, we respect the legislative process. The House has a bill. The Senate is putting forward a bill. There are folks that are disappointed that the House didn't cut enough. There are probably going to be people in the Senate that are trying to cut more. And the bottom line is that whatever happens to this bill, that's not the end of reducing government waste, that it's going to continue to happen, that right now, Russ Vogt at the Office of Management and Budget is rolling up a bunch of the stuff that Elon discovered that is very, very wasteful spending. We're beginning to send packages up to the House or to the Senate for people to rescind it. And the bottom line is that those rescissions are going to continue to happen for the next 4 years. And so if you're disappointed in the path of spending in these bills, then you shouldn't be, because there's going to be so much more that comes in the future as well.
Just to be very clear, though, you acknowledge what the CBO says, what other analysts have said, that this will add trillions of dollars to the deficit.
No, I don't acknowledge that, because the bottom line is that the CBO estimate is conditional on 1.8% economic growth, which is ludicrous. I think we're going to get at least 3% growth because of all the economic stuff that's in the bill. But the other thing that the CBO isn't doing is they're not even running a counterfactual that makes any sense. So if the bill doesn't pass, then there's going to be the biggest tax hike in history, which is going to cause a deep recession, which itself would increase the deficit enormously because of all the social welfare payments that we would have to make. And so I think you have to think about what's the counterfactual. And the bottom line is, if you think that we're going to have growth in the ones, then the CBO numbers are something that you should think about. If you think we're going to have growth around 3, then the bill doesn't add to the deficit at all. So the question is, what do you think, and why do you think that about growth? That's the way we should think about that.
Okay, it's worth noting it's not just the CBO, it's the Joint Committee on Taxation, it's the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. But this is what you said about the CBO back in 2017. You said the staffs of the Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation have a level of technical expertise that is difficult for any institution to match. The depth and breadth of expertise at CBO and JCT, the Joint Committee on Taxation, are virtually unmatched. Right. You're now saying that they're wrong?
No, I'm saying that they're wrong about this score. But don't forget that this score doesn't include growth effects. And so there are people at the CBO that are brilliant about modeling growth effects, but this score does not include growth effects. And so in the end, whether this tax bill is great for the economy and great for the budget is going to depend on the growth effects. And the Joint Tax Committee and the CBO are not including growth effects in this analysis. And so it's not inconsistent at all. In fact, way back when I was in graduate school, I used to hang out at the Joint Tax Committee because one of my best friends was chief economist there. And so I know Tom Barthold, who runs the Joint Tax Committee, I have a great deal of respect for him. But this is not about whether they're able to do a static score competently. They are. This is a question of what's the actual truth. And the truth is going to depend on what happens to growth. And I have a view of growth that is based on my experience from 2017, where we told you we'd get 3% growth, and that we did.
Okay. All right. Kevin Hassett, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a great weekend. We have much more news still ahead, so stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We want to turn now to a legal victory for the Trump administration's deportation agenda. The Supreme Court now allowing the White House to revoke the temporary legal status given to more than 500,000 immigrants by the Biden administration. That program was put in place in 2021. It granted protections to migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela on humanitarian grounds, allowing them to live and work in the United States. Now, we should note the Supreme Court's 7-2 decision is temporary as the case continues to play out in the lower courts. NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley joins me now. Julia, thank you so much for being here. So tell us what the court said. What was the reason behind this?
There wasn't actually a lot of detail in what the court said, but really what they're doing is they are allowing the government to put on pause a order from a judge in California that said that they could not block, that they could not, sorry, there's too many reversals. Basically, the Supreme Court is saying that they can deport people who came into the Biden administration on these programs. It was Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela. These are people who applied from their home countries, had U.S.-based sponsors, and then came in legally. Now they're being told not only does their legal status not extend any longer, but basically they could be the first up for deportation. We did reporting on this during the transition. Basically, the Trump administration sees this as an easy way to boost those deportation numbers because they know exactly where these people are. They gave all that information up when they came in legally.
So, Julia, just paint a picture for us. I mean, how quickly could these people be deported? Are we talking about days? Are we talking about weeks? What exactly happens to them?
It could happen very quickly. But, you know, if the Trump administration decides to make these people a top priority and the news stories start pouring in about hundreds of thousands, or hundreds at least at the beginning, of people from these programs being deported, I feel like that won't work with their narrative as well as that they want to go after the worst of the worst because these were people who were vetted before they came here. Now, I will say there was a problem with sponsor fraud. We reported here that there were a lot of sponsors that were listed that seemed to be the same people. The Social Security numbers were all zeros. There were problems with this program. But this is also the only avenue that people had to come legally into the United States from those countries. And the Biden administration thought it was a success because those nationalities dropped at the southern border trying to cross illegally by 98% after they put this in place. So basically, they're taking away the only incentive and now making that a punishment and putting them up first for deportation.
So you have new reporting, Julia, against this backdrop about the new deportation numbers. What are they? What do they tell us? And what are some of the conversations behind the scenes about what the expectation is moving forward?
Well, we were able to get a snapshot of the April numbers, which showed they were up over 17,200. That's the first month under this administration. They've been higher than what they were during the same time period under Biden, in part because there aren't as many people crossing the border to deport. But even though they're up, they're not taking a victory lap. In fact, just about a week and a half ago, Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem put pressure on ICE and said they need to increase their arrest to 3,000 a day. Now, if you can remember, the first Sunday of this administration, they came out with about 1,200 a day as a quota. They've never met that, and now they're more than doubling it. So they're really moving the bar here. They're feeling the pressure, and I think that's why we're starting to see some major staff shakeups at ICE. They just removed the head of enforcement removal operations. That's the part of ICE that does the arrests and the deportations. So they keep coming up with kind of personnel changes to manage their way out of this. But at the end of the day, if they don't have more planes and they don't have more detention space and they don't have more manpower, how would they ever reach those numbers?
It all comes down to resources. Julia Ainsley, thank
you
you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Coming up after the break, bucking the billionaires, how Democrats are trying to hone an anti-big money messaging platform and all the political fallout after a massive week for DOGE and the economy. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As Democrats try to rebrand and reinvent their party, several prominent members have coalesced around anti-billionaire rhetoric. Take a look.
We should stop acting like these billionaires are friends of the working person. Trump Musk, Bezos, all of them should be the folks that the Democratic Party is standing up against.
The bill isn't a plan to help working people. It's a massive handout to billionaires and a gut punch to families trying to make ends meet.
I think this is very clearly what this moment is about. Our party is about families over billionaires.
And according to Politico, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is also expected to take aim at billionaires at an event in South Carolina tonight. Joining me now is Notice Politics reporter Reese Gorman, former chief spokesperson for Vice President Kamala Harris and co-host of The Weeknight on MSNBC, Simone Sanders Townsend, and Republican strategist and Push Digital Group Vice President T.W. Arihi. Thanks to all of you for being here on this Friday. Reese, let me start with you. So you hear that rhetoric. It sort of echoes what we've heard from Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on their campaign across the country. Have the Democrats finally settled on a message, particularly as they're trying to combat what Trump has called his big, beautiful bill?
I do think that, indeed. I mean, this has been Bernie AOC's message since they've been in politics since whenever they got in. And so now I think really, the Democrats did lose a lot of working class voters in this last election. Trump kind of swept them up. And then Trump also has had the working class and the billionaires now all on his side. So I think they're really trying to be we need working class voters to get back in order to retake the White House 28, to win the midterms in 26. And so that's kind of the message they're going on. Is Trump is Elon's literally in the White House with him all the time. That's going to be our message. That's what we're going to coalesce around here. Yeah, and I want to delve into Elon in a second. But Simone, is this the message to win back working class voters? I mean, it really was part of the reason that Democrats lost, a big part.
I don't know if this is the message to win back working class voters. I think it is the message for Senator Sanders and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez because it is authentic to their brand. Literally, Bernie Sanders has been saying the same thing since I was born. And that consistency is what people like. I think that a version of this will work. And again, authenticity is what folks are looking for. People don't necessarily hate rich people. Everybody wants to be rich. I would like to be a billionaire, okay? Yeah. The problem that people have and the piece of the messaging that does resonate is these folks are for them, they're not for you. They're helping themselves. What they're doing is not helping you. And I think a version of that, but I think demonizing billionaires, when you got a DNC chair that has said, oh, some billionaires are good, I don't know if it's really going to catch fire across the board. TW, all of this is sort of in relation to the big, beautiful bill. Democrats don't really have the votes to block the big, beautiful bill, so they're using their messaging. Do you think this could influence some Republicans? Obviously the big argument for Republicans and the Republican critics in the Senate is there's not enough cuts in this bill.
Sure, and they're going to go through the reconciliation process and make it happen. But I feel like my head is spinning listening to AOC and Bernie talk. They tried that playbook already. Donald Trump is a billionaire. He ran alongside and campaigned alongside Elon Musk, saying, we're going to go in together. It wasn't a surprise that Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg tried to pony up to him in the last days of the election. It wasn't lost on anybody. And they keep running the same tired message. When Donald Trump ended his campaign and he said, they're for they, them, I'm for you, and that really resonated, it underscored a bigger problem, which is that the Democrats don't have a message because they're torn between reasonable Democrats and far-left progressives. The Republicans have seen that in years past, but that's where the Democrats are now. Until they figure that out, they won't win. Simone, what about that? And part of what TW is arguing is trying to and needing to find a message when it comes to the culture wars, which the Republicans and President Trump really have made central. Yeah, but I do think that Democrats do have a message when it comes to the culture wars. I think where Democrats have gotten caught up is when they don't fight back against the messaging. And so I'm for they, them, they're for they, them, I'm for you, that was an ad that went unanswered. Donald Trump said it all throughout that last election, and never did the Harris campaign answer it. Did Democrats across the country try to answer it? Instead, Democrats who were attacked, they ran away and said, oh, I'm not for girls and boys and girls bathrooms. It's crazy. Look at John Ewing. Just won the mayor's race in Omaha, Nebraska, unseated a two-term Republican incumbent, and she tried that playbook. And he said, well, look, she wants to focus on potties, I'm focused on the potholes. And so some of it is kind of Democrats can't run scared away from the issue. Just be what you're for and be clear about that. But I think part of the issue is folks don't feel
comfortable, maybe because they don't know what they're for. Yeah. I know what I'm for, Chris, so I don't know.
Well, let's talk about billionaires and stay on that theme. And you have both mentioned him, Elon Musk, really his day at the White House today. President Trump with this extraordinary send-off for him, Reese, in the Oval Office. I mean, I covered the first Trump administration. I can't remember the last time I saw a send-off like that. What do you make of this send-off and President Trump saying, you know, he's leaving, but not really. He's going to stay close.
I think it's just a way. I mean, obviously, Elon Musk was Trump's biggest financial donor. You know, on paper this last election. I mean, he really spent a lot of money. And so I think it's a way to keep him in the fold. Obviously, there's been a lot of reporting that they've been kind of back and forth, that he's angered a lot of the cabinet. So this is a way of kind of sending him off and being like, okay, he's leaving, but let's keep him close because we don't want to, like, a huge blow up, a big TikTok story of how they're falling out. But I do know also, like, Republicans on the Hill are happy to see him go. At least a lot of the moderates are, because behind closed doors, they're like, yes, I mean, these cuts are good, but, like, how can somebody in a district that Biden won go and campaign on these cuts when Elon is the face of them? Because Elon is very unpopular at the moment, for sure.
I mean, and TW, to that point, I mean, Elon Musk came in promising $2 trillion in cuts, then it was $1 trillion. Now he says he's found $100 billion, but he says, don't worry, my team's still here. We're going to find more cuts. Is he perceived as having been successful? What are people saying inside Republican circles?
So twofold. I saw a Babylon Bee headline that said Elon Musk leaves trying to reform government for an easier job of putting men on Mars. So I think there's that part of the way of looking at it. He had to try to move quick, but I think a lot of people are appreciative of the other things he did to find efficiencies. He talked today about duplicative jobs throughout the government, about waste going on and people just not doing proper oversight, Treasury payments. So those sort of unsexy things are going to be appreciated, but it will take time.
Yeah, I mean, that word time, I think, Simone, is the key, because there was sort of this rush to get everything done and then this acknowledgement, yeah, we've made some mistakes. Democrats are really, I think, to some extent trying to make Elon Musk, or have made Elon Musk, a bit of a villain. But do you think now that he's leaving, they need to shift strategies?
Well, look, I think Elon Musk is finished with what he came to do. I don't think he's completely gone. And I say that because I was waiting today to hear about how the servers are being uninstalled, how the staff that he handpicked that worked for him and DOGE are now leaving with him, and only a few are staying behind. But the servers he installed on the White House campus are still there. The back-end servers that are not connected to the White House apparatus, where's the data going? So I think that Democrats would be well to continue to ask about that, but not to make Elon Musk the focus, because he is not going to ever appear on a ballot. Elon Musk is not going to, he said it before, like, he's not running for president. And I think too much focus on Elon Musk and not enough focus on the responsibility of Republicans and the Republican president would be a mistake.
At the same time, CW, we saw what happened when Elon Musk, yes, he inserted himself into the presidential, but he inserted himself into the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, spent a lot of money there, camped out there, and lost big time, and then was sort of perceived to be a political liability.
I don't love reading too much into races like that. Look, this was a Supreme Court race. Donald Trump is nowhere near the ballot. It's Elon Musk is definitely a controversial figure, so that added dynamic. I don't like reading too much into that. But what it did show you is when he said the other day, or a week ago, when he said, I'm probably going to back out of politics, I don't think that's true. I think he's going to stay involved in the issues and races he cares about, just like he did in Wisconsin, come what may.
Interesting. Well, you know, Reese, it sort of reminds me a little bit of the Trump-Bannon relationship. Bannon did not leave on the best terms. He did not get this Oval Office send-off, but the two of them have remained in close touch, and Bannon continues to be a close outside advisor. Do you think that's the type of role that we will see Elon Musk play?
I think he'll play a bigger role than Bannon will, because obviously Elon, I think, has a bigger audience and just a bigger kind of messaging platform. I mean, he has X, he owns X. And it's not just Trump doesn't just listen to him. I mean, he can kind of rally up the grassroots to get the legislature going, to get Congress moving, to get, I mean, he tanked a bill in December, a spending bill. So he has this power that Bannon doesn't necessarily have, because he is the richest man, because he has a direct line to Trump, and because he has just such a big platform where people, he tweets and people listen, and it's going to be a huge platform that even if he's not necessarily in the White House in Trump's ear 24/7, if he doesn't like something, he can let you know, and then people will honestly listen and do what he kind of wants. I mean, the Speaker of the House responded to him on Twitter.
All right, well, we'll be watching closely. Great conversation, guys. Thank you so much. Reese, Simone, and TW, really appreciate it. Still to come, the fallout from the Trump administration's fight against Harvard and its efforts to oust the university's foreign students. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The Trump administration is once again escalating its ongoing feud with Harvard. According to a State Department cable seen by NBC News, the administration is instructing all U.S. missions and consulates to amp up their vetting of social media accounts belonging to visa applicants looking to travel to Harvard. And hours later, President Trump renewed his threat to withhold billions of dollars in federal grants while accusing the Ivy League university of failing to root out anti-Semitism. Today's move on vetting visa applicants is the latest in a series of moves by the White House against Harvard, including trying to revoke the school's ability to enroll international students. With me now is Cornell Brooks, professor of the practice of public leadership and social justice at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's also the former president and CEO at the NAACP and a civil rights attorney. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen. Good to be with you.
Well, it's really wonderful to have you here. Let's just start by getting your reaction. The State Department ordering that basically it's ramping up vetting of Harvard visa seekers. What is your reaction to this directive?
My reaction is the reaction of, I would hope, millions of Americans across the country, which is to say this unconstitutional, unlawful, unprecedented train wreck of actions taken against Harvard really threaten democracy and universities, colleges across the country. How so? So having a federal judge essentially hit the pause button on this unconstitutional travel ban to Harvard, right? The president then decides to have enhanced vetting of people applying for visas to come to Harvard to teach, to work, to study, or to even visit, right? Now, Kristen, I want you to imagine this. Imagine if a president chose Ohio State and Michigan, let's say Brandeis and Yeshiva, or Catholic University and Notre Dame, or any HBCUs. What gives a president the right to essentially pick a college and decide that no one can even visit the school, much less work or study there? And he cites anti-Semitism, notwithstanding the fact that he hasn't apparently he or his administration hasn't apparently not paid attention to the report that Harvard prepared on this very subject. And the point being here is, this is another effort of the president to an effort to weaponize a serious issue in order to exert control over universities and muffle speech.
Professor Brooks, let me follow up with you on that, on the allegation that Harvard hasn't done enough to address anti-Semitism. What say you? How do you respond to that?
Here's what I say. I am a civil rights lawyer of 30 years. I led the NAACP, the oldest civil rights organization in the country, founded by African Americans and Jewish Americans. I take anti-Semitism seriously, so seriously that I would encourage the administration to read the report that Harvard prepared, which offers a grocery list of recommendations, and I would encourage the administration to look at what Harvard has already done, which is to say make changes with respect to courses, starting a number of dialogues, a number of programs, engaging staff members, faculty, staff, and students over many months. The point being here is look at the work that Harvard is doing. How it's addressing the problem, as opposed to weaponizing a problem that not only that Harvard has, but a problem that's endemic to American society.
You know, I've been listening to the interviews with some of the students, some of the international students at Harvard this week. Professor, I wonder what they are telling you and what you are hearing, the reaction amongst the student body to this fight that Harvard is having with the federal government.
Kristen, I have to tell you, students had to walk during commencement and graduation yesterday, a tightrope of joy and anxiety. And not only the students, but their parents. So people who have worked years, sacrificed much to get to Harvard, and all of a sudden there's this cloud of suspicion over them simply because they're international students. And so they're quite anxious, quite afraid, and with this heightened vetting, this slow and suspicious scrutiny of visa applicants to even come to Harvard, this makes a bad situation worse. And so for many of my students, this is it's a tragic moment. It's a very, very tragic moment. Put yourself in their positions and think about how you would feel if you studied hard, studied long, only to have a president violate the Constitution to hurt you and your classmates.
All right, Cornell Brooks, thank you so much for being here, for your perspective. We hope to keep in touch with you as we continue to track this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to take a moment now to congratulate my longtime friend, colleague, and mentor, Lester Holt, who after 10 years at the helm of NBC Nightly News will be signing off from that broadcast for the final time tonight. Lester has seen and covered it all during his tenure at Nightly News, and he has done it with remarkable professionalism and a steadfast commitment to the highest level of journalism. We are also thrilled for Lester in his next chapter as he looks to focus full-time on hosting Dateline. Tune in tonight for Lester Holt's final broadcast of Nightly News only on NBC. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News stations. I'll have exclusive interviews with House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senator Raphael Warnock. The news continues with Tom Costello in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.